are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
I've been a participant in some of the most insidious lies and witnessed to deeds that no crazed man can imagine. I spent years watching you, my lofty position, to know that you were the one I could trust.
And why did you lie to me?
There still exist some secrets which should remain secret. Truths that people are just not ready to know.
Who are you to decide that?
The world's reaction to such knowledge would be far too dangerous.
Dangerous? You mean in the sense of outrage? Like the reaction to the Kennedy assassination, or MIAs, or radiation experiments on terminal patients. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Roswell, the Tuskegee experiments. Where will it end?
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth! Get out!
For what? You'll kill me?
Always remember, dissension's the greatest form of patriotism.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies.
We have before us the opportunity to forge a new world order.
Yes, we can. And you say.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
A lie that's most convincingly hidden between two truths.
I guess it won't end it.
No! I don't have time for this. This is about saving the future of humanity.
We know things are bad, worse than bad. We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the crying in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I want you to get up right now. Go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm a human being. My life has value, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You shall not pass!
You're listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project with your host, Rob Skiba.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm real excited about today's broadcast. We'll be talking with my good friend, Leonard Ulrich. But before we do that, I want to play a video by another good friend of mine, Rick Hummer. Some of you, of course, know who Rick is if you've been keeping up with our Seed the Series audio drama. And he's a man of many talents. Well, he created a music video that deals with the subject matter of tonight's broadcast. So check it out.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself, 'cause it's right around the corner from you. La-da-da-da-da-da. Take a second and look around, my friends. I'm asking, can't you see what's going down? They run the show on you and you're blind, so pop your bubble, 'cause you're just another fish in the crowd. You walk their walk and talk their talk, and your own tongue is spreading their lies. See what I mean? That screen ain't clean, and you incoeptus victimize. Like da 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 da. in the world in many ways. It's no wonder that Babylon is crumbling down. Going to and fro we go, never concerned yet. They've always been around. You walk their walk and talk their talk. You've never stopped to open your eyes. See what I mean? Your green ain't clean, and you wet coeptus victimized. Have you questioned the point of no return? The clock is ticking, and it don't plan on slowing down. The horns are blowing like never before. The trains are coming, and you're just a face in the crowd. You walk your walk and talk your talk, and the horsemen have taken their ride. See what I mean? Time to get clean, and you went coeptus victimized.
What do you know? I see the signs everywhere I go. And have you seen the ones with the means? They power culture and feed off greed. Lie to lie, planting their demon seeds. I've seen the truth and it's time to believe. They despise him and you and me. Our blood didn't come from monkeys and trees. He hung on the cross for you and me. This ain't no game of hide and seek. It's a game of responsibility, free will, and the red letters that will set you free. The King of all kings waits patiently. So what can you do? What do you know? It's time for you to drop to your knees and cry out from the floor.
That's a little video done by my friend Rick Hummer, and I think it's probably appropriate for what we're going to be talking about tonight. Some of you who have followed the Revolutionary Radio Project will remember Leonard Ulrich. We did, I think, at least one or two shows together regarding his one of the best videos I've ever seen, quite frankly. It's called New World Order, Secret Societies and Biblical Prophecy, Volume 1. And I've certainly talked about it a lot and wrote about it in my first book, Babylon Rising. And he also gave a great endorsement for the book on the back cover. And so if you followed us when we were on Blog Talk Radio, you've probably heard our interview that we did together and maybe seen the video that we put together on YouTube on it as well. But here on Truth Frequency Radio, this is the first time having him on with us on this new network. So for the sake of you who have never heard of him, Leonard has a Bachelor in Education from 1991, a BA in 1992, a double major in Western History. He's been a teacher for 7 years. He has a wood product manufacturing technology diploma from 2001. He became aware of the New World Order over a mentally violent 3-day period in June of 2005. It was at that point that he knew his skills as a teacher, amateur, historian, prophecy enthusiast, builder, and technician had to be put to good use. Leonard believes that the evil we see today is organized. The good news for those who are Christians is that that which is opposed to God is fulfilling biblical prophecy as a demonstration of God's power. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. Leonard, are you there, sir?
Yes, I am. It's good to be back, Rob.
Yeah, great to have you back, man. And we're doing this as a pre-recorded show because the time slot's not good for you. So it actually afforded us an opportunity to do this Google Hangout, which I think should be pretty cool as well. So I'm excited to get into it. But before we do, I'm curious as to what that mentally violent 3-day period was in 2005. What's that about?
Well, it's very simple. I was so invested in the conventional paradigm of history, which is that history just happens. It's kind of like, evolution via the history books. And after that 3-day period, I started to realize, you know what? History doesn't happen. It's made to happen. And so because I was so invested in the conventional view as a double major in history and as a former history teacher, there was a lot that had to be broken down in my mind and had to be rebuilt. And now that it is rebuilt, I have so many more answers to my questions than I did before. And I'm still looking for a lot of answers. I have all the answers that I need. It's just that my curiosity keeps me driving forward, wanting to explain more. And the more I look into the situation here or there, for example, the Paris massacre of this past week, the more answers I get, the more that fits into deception and death and debt. That is the model by which the world works. Deception, debt, and death.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. When I was doing all the research that I did for my first book, Babylon Rising, I was obsessively going through the news, always, looking at anything and everything I could find, trying to figure out what's going on. And it was videos like yours, your first one there, New World Order, Secret Societies and Biblical Prophecy, that helped steer my thinking. Because I already knew something was wrong. It's sort of like when Morpheus is talking to Neo, and he's like, there's something not quite right. You can't quite put your finger on it. You helped unlock. You were a good portion of the red pill that I was taking at that time, and I was obsessed with the news. But as I've started to kind of come off of that page and get more on the science fiction stuff that I'm working on with Seed, I've intentionally not been watching the news, not been reading anything, not been looking into it, and I'm much happier as a result. I'm so much happier. Now, that's not to say I have my head stuck in the sand. I certainly don't. I'm aware of things that are going on. But man, how has it affected you as you've continued to dive into that stuff? I mean, did you have that same sort of, man, it's just eating you up after a while, or what?
Yes, but what has really concerned me lately is that the people that I care about would rather not hear the truth. They say they want the truth, but if you give it to them, in a full fire hose force, they just, recoil, and they go, oh, well, that's a little bit disturbing, thank you very much. Or they'll have an agnostic view. They'll say, well, we can't really know the truth. You're basing your assumptions on, a database that's too small. And they don't know that I don't have a family. I choose not to connect my television to cable TV. And I've got a double major in history, and I've been a student of history for 20 years. And this is what I'm geared to study. I couldn't tell you who won the Super Bowl last year. I couldn't tell you who's in the running for the Super Bowl this year. And I feel good about that.
Yeah.
Because these are issues that don't matter. What matters right now, as far as I'm concerned, is the global financial situation, because I'm here to say that it's not over. In fact, just one stat, the global debt level has increased by about 70% since 2008. So how can anyone say that it's party time because gas prices are low?
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I mean, I thought that, I've noticed the gas prices will tend to go down around the so-called holidays, Christmas time frame and whatnot, because of the consumerism, and they want you to spend money elsewhere, money that has debt attached to it to begin with. And so, I started, it was like pushing close to $4 for quite some time around here, and now it's right around $1.70, and I'm like, wow, I mean, really? So What's going on with that? I mean, the holidays, so-called holidays, are come and gone. So, what's your take on the gas prices?
Okay, this is actually the key issue that everything around in our conversation tonight will revolve around. The gas prices are the canary in the coal mine that I've been waiting for since 2008. Quite frankly, I was surprised that the powers that be, the financial powers that be behind the City of London, New York, etc., have managed to keep the game going since 2008. And I have been waiting for a sign of deflation as far as the second wave is concerned, the second wave of economic crash or crisis is concerned, because just before a tsunami hits, the tide goes out, the water level goes down, okay? That is so important because we've had 5 rounds of stimulus, QE1, QE2, Operation Twist, call it whatever you want, and what have you got? You've got a stock market that's high. Literally, it's high on your tax dollars. How can anybody say that a Dow of around 18,000 points is indicative of the financial health of America and the rest of the world when you've got 50 million Americans on food stamps, and when 1 in 4 American households has nobody earning a living in them? That's disturbing, okay? So the Wall Street situation, egged on by politicians who are bought and paid for by both sides. We know the Fortune 500 companies just simply pay all the horses in the race, and no matter who wins, you win if you're, Fortune 500 type. And but since 2008, all this government money has gone to this little bubble called Wall Street. And the world is bigger than Wall Street. Wall Street may want you to think that's not true, but Wall Street doesn't exist as an island. So, because the global economy is in a slowdown mode, gas prices are the indicator. And I'm a heavy investor in gold and silver. And 4 months ago, when one of the Federal Reserve board members merely hinted at a future proposed round of QE2 being off the table, Wall Street didn't flinch. It didn't go up, it didn't go down. And then I realized, oh boy, the stimulus isn't working anymore. So at that point, I sold everything. And I waited for gold and silver to go down, and it did, but it didn't go down to the degree that I wanted it to. Now, keep in mind that it's been a tough road for gold and silver investors. 4 years ago, silver was knocking on the door of $50 an ounce, and 2 months ago, it hit $15 an ounce.
Really? $15?
Yeah, it was just pounded. But here's the thing.
If you want to buy it.
Oh, totally. And I thought, it might go down to 12. So, I mean, you can make money on the way down if you get out, watch the price go down, and then go back in, right? I'm not smart enough to short the market. That's their game. I don't play their game. I stick to, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. Call me a Luddite, but that's the way I play. I play it safe. But anyways, these gas prices are the fall in the waterline that I've been waiting for since 2008, because the economy is in lockup mode, and it's going to get even worse because hundreds of trillions of dollars in oil futures and derivatives contracts are riding on a realistic price for oil. And the current price of oil is anything but realistic. So don't think of the amount of money you're saving by every time you fill up. Think about those hundreds of trillions of dollars of bets. Derivatives are bets. That's it, okay? That are riding based on literal MIT graduates creating formulas which maybe 1/10 of 1% can understand, and it's just elaborate bets. And we do not know why the Saudis, who are in charge of OPEC, have not chosen to cut back production. This is a big mystery. I mean, we can speculate all day, and I just hate speculation because it's generally worthless. We could say, well, you know, did Uncle Sam tap the Saudis / OPEC on the shoulder and say, drop the price of oil because 68% of the Russian economy is dependent on petroleum exports, and that is much more effective than economic sanctions against the Soviet Union or former Soviet Union. We could say that, or there's another possibility. Did the Russians and Chinese tap OPEC on the shoulder and say, kill the price of oil to kill the emerging shale oil industry in America? Remember, this is economic war. And America, over the past 2 years, has become the #1 oil exporter, thanks to shale oil production. But that entire industry is in the tank because you can't make money off of shale oil production at these prices. The Saudis can, but the shale oil producers can't. So this is economic war, Rob, and we're seeing this, and hundreds of trillions of dollars are at stake, not based on oil, but based on bets on oil. So I'm watching this with just absolute fascination, knowing that this is the straw that's going to break the camel's back. If this keeps going till fall, honestly, in my mind, I'm estimating an 80% probability of a crash.
So you think the low gas prices are actually going to lead to the big crash everybody's been warning about?
Absolutely. When you set off a nuclear bomb, you have to have a small amount of uranium hit a large amount of uranium to start that reaction. In the insanely leveraged $1.5 quadrillion world of derivatives, if any significant percentage of these bets go wrong, then the whole house of cards falls down, because according to the Bill Clinton repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999, there is no firewall between the Wall Street banks and your bank account. It doesn't exist. So now, when a board member of the Federal Reserve has passed legislation stating that you are an unsecured creditor to your bank, and now whatever debts occur on the bank's books, your bank can issue you shares of bank stock in lieu of seizing a percentage of your bank account. My word, you know, I make sure I don't have anything significant in a bank.
Have you ever heard the story that I told about the Russian helicopter in Plano, Texas?
No.
Steve Quayle, you know who Steve Quayle is?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Steve, he's been warning about pending, well, all kinds of pending doom, you know, quite a bit. He's a watchman on the wall. I mean, like any of us who have played that role, none of us claim to have all the answers. We're looking at what we're seeing and sounding the alarms, you know, appropriately. And he was looking at, and after, this was a number of years ago, I want to say it was 2010 maybe, I forget, but anyway, he was talking about all the signs were pointing to the possibility of a bank holiday within the next week or two. And he was basically saying, you know, if the front page of my website is blue or red or whatever color it was that he said, you know, then you know there's going to be a problem. You know, the balloon's gone up. It's happened. And you know, he made a really strong case. And at that time, that's when I was doing a lot of my research and everything. In fact, I had created this graphic that was in my book, Babylon Rising. under the chapter of the Omega Plan, talking about how wealth and resources funnels up and domination and control comes down, and how it all works like this, funneling up to the global elite, and they just bring everything down to us, and we're on the bottom end of the bad side of this graphic here. Annuet Coeptus, as Rick Hummer's song so well illustrated. Well, I went to the bank, and I didn't have a whole lot of money there to begin with, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to take it out, and I'm going to go get silver and gold, honest weights and measures. And so I had all of this on my mind. You got to kind of put yourself in my mindset. So I go to the bank, literally liquidated my bank account, and was taking what I had. I was going to go get silver and gold. And I walk out, and I see a Russian helicopter, Mi-24 Hind D, coming in on low approach over Chase Bank, flying right at me. I'm going, this is a problem, I was on the phone with a buddy of mine who was a former airborne guy, and I'm like, dude, there's a Russian Mi-24 Hind D flying right at me. He's like, what? I'm like, I'll call you back. So I get off the phone with him, and I see the helicopter going over to this area where I knew that looked like it was going to land, and so I decided, well, I'm gonna go follow it and see what's going on. So I get my car and I head in that direction, and I'm at a light and on this crossroads right here, and I was about to take a left to go toward where I saw the helicopter go. Oh, we're getting ready to go to break, so to be continued. So we'll come back in 3 minutes, and I'll tell you the rest of that story. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm talking with Leonard Ulrich. And right before the break, I was telling a story about the Russian helicopter that invaded Plano, Texas. Okay, so again, you got to put yourself in my mindset. I have been listening to Steve Quayle. I'm thoroughly convinced that everything's about to hit the fan, about to have a bank holiday. I liquidate my bank, walk out. There's Mi-24 flying right at me. I'm at a red light, and I'm about to turn left to head in the direction to where I saw the helicopter go, and I look up and I see a second one coming. Okay, now at this point, I am switching into Wolverine. I'm going into Red Dawn mode, man. I'm like, this is it, man. Holy cow, this is happening. And so I pull over. I see the helicopter cross the street at real low, like right over the street, right over the top of cars. Lands in this small little airfield. It's right across from I think it's a QT or a racetrack gas station. And I'm watching this thing land, and there's a bunch of us sitting there in the parking lot of this gas station. We're all kind of looking at each other like, what is going on here? And of course, we're in Texas, so everybody's packing, So we're starting to take inventory. What do you got? I got a shotgun. What do you got? I got a 38 or whatever. I got a 45. So everybody's sort of taking inventory of what and we're seriously thinking something may go down here. Meanwhile, the helicopter's winding down, and there's like all these people walking over toward the helicopter. And I'm like, did you see the movie, man? I mean, the teacher, right? The teacher, when the parachutes are landing in the high school and the teacher walks out, hey, what's the matter? Did you guys fly off course or something? And the dude takes an AK-47 out and, whacks the teacher and starts shooting up the school. So I'm thinking, guys, I'm convinced, like all of my adrenaline is going. I'm convinced I'm going to see a bloodbath. And then the helicopter finally wound down, and I got a closer look at it, and what I saw on the wings, what I thought I saw full armament when it was coming at me. I mean, my brain kind of filled that in because I spent 8 years in the Army training how to shoot that thing down and identify it. So my mind filled in a whole lot of things, but when I saw it finally winding down, I got a little closer look at it. It didn't have armament on the wings, and then I saw the guy get out in civilian clothes, and I'm going, okay, that's different. So all of us sort of took a deep breath and relaxed. So I went over to the guy, And I said, dude, you almost got wasted. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, see all those pickup trucks over there? All those good old boys, we're about to go Red Dawn on you, man. I said, what are you doing here? What is this? And he said, oh, we're just out for a joyride. They're going to get a Firehouse Subway sandwich at the little strip mall that was right next door. And it turns out they were part of a Russian Air Museum in Lancaster, Texas, and they had all this Cold War era equipment. And, they're, of course, promoting their air museum by taking the helicopter out because it draws a lot of attention. I'm like, wow. But what that told me was that only myself and a very few other people were actually even remotely prepared if this was a real-world scenario. And I think, the stuff that we're talking about tonight and the stuff that you've been doing with your videos is trying to make the sleeping masses wake up, because something is going on behind the scenes. Now, your first video, again, I can't recommend it highly enough. If you guys haven't seen this video, you got to check it out. New World Order, Secret Societies, and Biblical Prophecy, Volume 1. It's on YouTube. You can check it out. What was your motivation behind that Volume 1, and how does that take us into what we're talking about here at Volume 2?
Well, you can get whatever you want on the internet. That doesn't mean that it's true. So, I mean, you've got to filter out truth over the internet, which is like walking through a minefield, right? Anything you could blow up on you at any moment. So, I, over the past 7 years, have come to follow two rules as far as discerning what is truth. And those two rules are very simple. Number one, if you don't have the original quotation in front of you, then all you've got is historical hearsay. I don't care if somebody said that somebody said this. I care about, did somebody say that? Show me the original quotation. Because if you can't, then you're just another blogger with an opinion, and that's just not very valuable. And number two, I found that the only way you can interpret today's headlines properly is just by following the Bible. Now, some of you may find that to be narrow-minded, call it whatever you want, but just keep in mind that the evil people running this world are following the Bible because they believe in their delusion of grandeur that secret societies created the Bible and that they are the master of this template which only they can interpret and act on. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, to be so full of yourself as to think that people before you wrote this piece of literature which has so many predictions about the future that couldn't possibly be the product of any human intelligence, and then think that you have the ability to make that happen in the future is a testimony to the insanity of some of the people running this world. People like Henry Kissinger, for example. I just found out last week and verified that a group of rabbis long ago excommunicated him from Judaism because Henry Kissinger has a Jewish background, kind of like a lot of people have a Christian background. Doesn't mean that they are that way today. I mean, they get suckered in by temptation, and they lose all bearings on their moral compass, right? So, basically, the Luciferian plan is in full effect, not because I say so, but because the people who follow the New World Order philosophy say so. And I'll just give you a little link to what I can prove, and that is Hillary Clinton's master's thesis was on Saul Alinsky. And Saul Alinsky wrote Rules for Radicals, which is just a refined version of the Hegelian dialectic. And the Hegelian dialectic is a product of a German 18th century philosopher who said that you can affect change by producing a problem, controlling the reaction, and offering the solution. So Saul Alinsky refined that, and in his foreword to his book, I mean, he dedicates Rules for Radicals to Lucifer, the world's first rebel and free thinker.
Wow.
So how can you write a master's thesis if you're Hillary Clinton and not have those sentences in the foreword, the introduction to the book, not noted?
Yeah, well, I'll just go ahead and ask you. Do you think our world leaders here in the United States or in the world in general are all kind of playing on the same team?
Well, let's see. Your choices for president for 2016 will probably be a Bush or a Clinton. Now, where have we seen this before?
Or, God forbid, a third term of dictatorship.
Yeah, so, I mean, if anybody thinks that politics can't be controlled, I mean, you're looking at two presidential candidates who were chosen a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I used to be really politically active, and I used to think, rock the vote, get all that out there, do the Tea Party thing, and, sadly thinking that there is a political solution to what really amounts to a spiritual problem. But then, of course, doing the research and realize, these guys are either all related to each other or they're all playing in the same parties, doing their thing up Bohemian Grove or, the Bilderberger meetings or whatever. I mean, I think it was Judge Napolitano who said, look, Republicans, Democrats, they're just two wings on the same bird of prey.
Yes, and Judge Napolitano got kicked off of Fox News for a period for saying that. And other journalists have pretty well suffered the same fate, like Dylan Ratigan. It's just amazing, when he goes off on a 4-minute rant, literally, with total passion, and that rant gets like 3 million views on YouTube, and he lays out how America has gone from capitalism to crony capitalism to extractionism, where the cancer that is called Wall Street that is just feeding on America to the point of death, which is where we are. I guess the producers just couldn't handle it and just let him go. But of course, ratings rule, so they found him back on the screen, right? So it's the same thing with Judge Napolitano. I mean, you can tell the truth to a point, but when you really nail it and you ruffle a few feathers of the executives / money takers from politicians, right, which is what the producers are, I mean, let's just come right out and say it, then you're hurting your potential advertising / revenue base. So you can tell the truth up to a certain point, but you can't tell all the truth. So my hat is off to these people for calling it like it is. And if it is confirmed in 2016 that we're going to have a Bush versus Clinton election, then I don't need to say anything more.
Well, that's what I was saying, and I'm like, okay, guys, if these are the three choices, God forbid a third term of a dictatorship, or a Clinton or a Bush, will you now finally acknowledge that your votes don't mean a thing and likely never did?
Yeah, I mean, when you own all the horses in a race, does it really matter who wins?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I liked the beginning of your New World Order Secret Societies video. You had a quote from George Carlin. What does he say at the beginning of it?
Well, he said, basically people are coming out with all these conspiracy theories. Oh, we can't possibly prove this or prove that, And I actually tied George Carlin's quote, who is, as everyone knows, a foul-mouthed, sarcastic atheist / comedian, with a verse from the Bible, because it says the same thing.
I know.
Right? So no matter how you look at it, okay, this is nailed. So when we have George Carlin, of all people, and the Bible saying something in agreement, I think it's pretty safe to start a movie based on that.
Yeah, well, he basically is this little rant that he does, and is that powerful people just might have a plan. That's so crazy. It's so crazy to think that these people who have unlimited wealth and unlimited power just might actually have a plan.
Right, and the plan is to allow the US dollar to die, because those who are in positions of power know that every product has a life cycle. No one's rushing out to buy VCRs anymore. Okay, they did that in the 1980s. Nobody's rushing out to buy Blu-ray players anymore. They did that 10 years ago. Every product has a life cycle, and the US dollar is just another product. And the average length of a fiat currency, meaning literally fiat means let it be so because I said so, as in the king says so, Caesar says so. Okay, if I had a $100 Monopoly bill right in front of me here, that's currency in the game of Monopoly. But if you went to a store and tried to buy something with that, you'd get either strange looks or a visit from the SWAT team. And as we get further and further along since 9/11, it's probably going to amount to a visit from the SWAT team, because you could be a terrorist, right? So my point in this little diversion is to suggest that the American dollar is like monopoly money, because when you step away from America, that money that you have in your hand is of no value. So if it has, so let me ask you and everyone else watching this a question. If it costs nothing to produce, is it worth anything?
No.
No, it's not.
No.
This is why gold and silver have been money, or considered money, or the most popular form of money for over 5,000 years. It takes energy to get it out of the ground, to refine it, to mint it up into bars, coins, whatever, and distribute it. And the beautiful thing about gold and silver is that over time, we've gotten more and more skilled at extracting it out of the earth, and the average rate of production increase for gold and silver has been around 2%, which is really, really good when you think about it, because inflation is currency devaluation. It's not the rising cost of goods and services like we've all been taught, all right? Technology has allowed us to produce things for less and less and less. See this camera behind me? 2 years ago, that would have cost $22,000. Rob will verify that.
Mm-hmm.
Now it costs $7,000. Okay? $7,000. That's the way it goes. So, your US dollars, like Canadian dollars, I'm from Canada, like any other fiat currency, let it be, or because I said so, has no intrinsic value. But what's even worse is that it's taken over 200 years to get to this point. It's a very complicated road, and I'm not going to give you all the twists and turns in that road tonight, but just keep one thing in mind. About 200 years ago, a very wealthy family by the name of Rothschilds, or the Rothschild family, made the greatest financial coup in all history. They knew that Napoleon lost the War of 1812 at Waterloo. And long story short, the Rothschild brothers had huge banking operations all across Europe, so they had their own private courier services all over Europe for about 10 years. And their intelligence agents, their banking agents, were observing what was going on during this very important battle, and their couriers were dispatched all the way to London a full 24 hours before the English couriers got there. So what happened was that the Rothschilds had insider information as to the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo, and they put out the rumor on the London Stock Exchange that Napoleon won the war. So what happened? The stock market tanked in London. And the Rothschilds, who had King Wilhelm IX of Hesse Castle, which is where the Hessian soldiers came from, which of course you experienced in America during your Revolutionary War. And Prince William was the wealthiest monarch in America at the time. The Rothschilds had his gold, which was being held in quote-unquote safekeeping because Napoleon was sweeping across Europe at the time. So they used somebody else's money, King William's money, to buy up pretty well all the stocks and bonds that they could get their hands on for pennies on the dollar. Then when the news actually was confirmed, hey, wait a minute, you know, we're victorious here, Napoleon's done, this whole French Revolution thing throughout Europe is done, it's over now, finally. Then, of course, the Rothschilds literally owned the Bank of England, which is not bad for a family who were just basically coin dealers 25 years prior. So that little story is so suppressed, and I've gotten my hands on an original 1961 edition by Friedrich Morton called The Rothschilds, and the Rothschilds hired Friedrich Morton to do their family history, and it says so in that book. And then when you've got a modern historian funded by the Rothschilds called Niall Ferguson, who's very popular all over the internet and BBC, contradicting that story, I publicly nail Niall Ferguson for that and simply say he, like our politicians, is just another puppet for the bankers who have won the money since that Battle of Waterloo to create money out of thin air and loan it to the governments of the world at interest. That's not a bad racket if you can get into it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And so that's the subject of your next video. I mean, the title of it is New World Order, The Illusion of Money, right?
Correct. Because all money has devolved into a system of debits and credits that are just simply computer entries. It costs nothing to produce, and these computer entries are issued at interest, which is contrary to the constitution of every single nation on the earth. I believe Article 8, Section 3 of your American Constitution, if I have my facts straight, I'm just going by memory. Canadian Constitution, I cite all these things in the film because I'm about proof. Again, I come from an academic background where every single sentence I made had to be documented, and that's what separates me from a lot of other documentaries out there. I prove every point on screen as I'm talking about it. So we're winding up not only into an era where money is an illusion, but like in the world of physics where there is matter and then there is antimatter, you've got fiat currency, and then you have derivatives, which, as I outlined before, and people have to understand this, there's about $1,500 trillion worth of derivatives, as in debt or bets, on the bank's books. And all they do every day is they swap derivatives back and forth in a high-speed trading network, and Joe Schmo investor like you and I, who puts his money down on some stock on E-Trade, is a sucker every time, because what these high-speed computer networks do is that they see your trade coming, and then they invest it on their behalf, not yours, their behalf, and they actually gamble with it for a few milliseconds, and they make a fraction of a penny off of your trade for a fraction of a cent, for a fraction of a second, and they take their cut, and they, on every single trade, manipulate the stock market up or down by just a hair for just a short period of time, so that the house always wins. And then, when they see too many trades coming in on one way, because they own the house, they bet on the opposite side of the trade. So they've got you coming and going.
Yeah. So any idea of a currency crash, therefore, has to be intentional. It has to be pre-planned, premeditated, and orchestrated to happen. It's not just happening because XYZ got out of control and we didn't know, and now look at the mess we've gotten ourselves into. We got to fight to get ourselves out of it. It was pre-planned to happen and will be following a script.
Absolutely. I have a memo from a key Obama cabinet member to all the private phone numbers of certain bankers, which talks about the end game scenario. This is like gold in my hands. And the end game scenario in context, and this memo was written in 1999, was to sign on all the nations of the world to these bets. It's just bookkeeping bets. For example, I can right now plunk down 6-7 figures on what the January low temperature is going to be in my city of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Now, what does that have to do with the real economy? Nothing. It's just a bet. And yet, these are assets and liabilities on the bank's books, and when you have too many bad bets, the bankers go to the politicians and say, give us more money or we will crash the system. So, I mean, they own the house, they own the politicians, and you and I are just suckers in their game. And to answer your question directly, because it's very, very important, I don't believe that the Chinese yuan will be the world's next reserve currency. I truly believe and have reason to believe, based on so-called CIA financial insiders that are all over the internet selling their books like hotcakes, like Jim Rickards, whose books I've read, like The Death of Money, is basically flogging the idea of the World Bank's or International Monetary Fund's special drawing right, or SDR. Now, if you think fiat currency is bad, this takes things to a whole new level, because the SDR is nothing more than a currency index of fiat currencies managed by the IMF. And so, for the first time in history, when the next crash occurs, most likely this fall, but it doesn't have to happen this fall, it will happen eventually, the banks will determine what the value of your national currency is worth, not the free market. So if you have X amount of assets and Y amount of liabilities, they become essentially the repo men, the financial repo men of your nation, and they will determine what your bank, what your currency is worth. So
we'll come back, and we're going to go to break right now. We'll come back and we'll talk about that after the break.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
And welcome back to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba. We're going into the second hour now with my friend Leonard Ulrich, and he's talking about the illusion of money. And right before the break, you were discussing how sort of the world system works and how they value currency and countries, what the net worth of the countries are.
That's right. You have the unholy trinity of the world financial situation, which is the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, and the International Monetary Fund. Now, each has its own different role. I will describe that in the film. I won't get into that now. The point is, and I want to re-emphasize this in the time that we have here, I don't believe, based on the hard data, not opinion, the hard data that I have in front of me, that the Chinese yuan will be the world's next reserve currency, because the Chinese economy isn't as healthy as many people think it is. In America, you've got welfare, but in China, you've got workfare. So what's happened is that the Chinese have shot themselves in the foot to a large degree by building huge cities of hundreds of thousands of people, potentially, that nobody lives in. Because in order to receive your government check, you have to do typically construction work. So you have 6-lane highways that have 1 or 2 cars on them. You've got dozens of apartment blocks, shopping malls, sports stadiums in the middle of nowhere China that nobody lives in. And there's dozens of these all over China.
Why do you think? Why are they doing that?
Because you have to, again, China is such an enigma. It is honestly the synthesis of the Hegelian dialectic, because you've got hyper-capitalism within communism. About 100 Chinese politicians control over 1 billion people. That's the way it is. There are still forced abortions in China. There are still, I hate to say this, but again, it's documented. I don't want you to believe anything I say. Check it out for yourself. There are mobile execution vans in China that know where you live, and they will deliver you, quote unquote, fresh to a hospital where, if you are labeled a political dissident, you can be harvested in terms of your organs, and within 48 hours, you have a long list of international customers from all over the world, say Saudi Arabia, America, Canada, Germany, Australia, whatever, of terminal cancer patients, for example, whatever, who are more than willing to pay top dollar for what they have been told are Chinese dissident organ harvesting cases, when in fact, as we both know and all the viewers and listeners know, that's not quite how it works. You are delivered as a product if you cross the Chinese government, the Chinese communist government, which is more than willing to use capitalism to maintain control. I mean, talk about demented and warped in every sense of the word.
So, okay, so what do you think then is going to be the world currency? And do you think, I mean, right now the US dollar is the reserve currency, but I mean, with them consistently putting us further and further into debt and devaluing in effect our country in and of itself, when they weigh those scales, if what you're saying is true, then we seriously come up wanting, because we have a debt overload that doesn't balance out well with whatever we produce, right? So then America gets kicked off the legitimate list of countries that could be the one that reigns, if I'm understanding you right. So in your mind then, if that's true, who is setting it? What country do you think is being set up to take over?
It's not a country, and this is so important, because now for the first time the bankers will be above the politicians. Now they already are, but I'm talking about, yeah, exactly. But I'm talking about in a supranational sense. So now, as we just said before the break, these bankers, the unholy trinity of finance, will determine what your national currency is worth. Kind of like when you go into repossession, your house is, the value of your home is determined by the banks, which may not be market value. The value of your car, which may be repossessed, may not be fair market value. Okay, all these things go on. For example, look at the city of Detroit. If you are a city of Detroit police officer, firefighter, EMT, your pensions are really in doubt because the city of Detroit filed for bankruptcy. And those pensions are pretty well the #1 liability on the city of Detroit's books. So as Detroit goes through bankruptcy, and this takes years to play out, okay, you will probably not get what you think you're entitled to. That has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with Detroit, which has everything to do with global economics. Because if GM can take American taxpayers' dollars in the form of a bailout, an auto bailout, and build a plant in the middle of some other country to produce cars for cheaper, then that's what they're going to do at the expense of American industry. So again, the dollar matters more than the vote. And
I've always I've just known that the usual 401k, retirement, whatever you want to call it, was never going to work for me. Social Security. I mean, I've known it like my whole life. So I've never been concerned with, well, I got to make sure I've got all this so much stored away or whatever, you know, through their system for my retirement. I've always known that if I'm going to have any kind of retirement, it's going to be whatever I'm able to do on my own and set it aside.
Well, the United States currently has over $120 trillion of unfunded liabilities. So look, let me make it very simple for everyone. If every single man, woman, and child in America, and every single business, and every single charitable organization was taxed at a 100% level, America would still not be able to fund its future liabilities. So collapse is guaranteed, or cutbacks are guaranteed. For example, Poland confiscated half of private pension funds last year. Don't tell me that couldn't happen in America. You know, then I just gave you the example of Detroit, and then Cyprus. Oh my word! I mean, here you have a tiny little island country in the middle of the Mediterranean, and you bank one day, and then Saturday you want to go to the bank to get some cash, do your Saturday shopping, and everything's in lockdown. You can't get your money out in 2 weeks. Or for 2 weeks. And the worst example I've heard in that whole Cyprus situation was that a couple was selling their house, they deposited their money in their account, and of course it got heavily taxed. And you know, when most of your money is tied up in your house and you want to move because you've got a new job opportunity, and suddenly you have half the funds you thought you had yesterday to buy a new house, that kind of throws a wrench in your life.
Well, yeah, but if you do that to 300 million people, you know, the current thereabouts population of the United States, I mean, you want to talk about chaos in the streets and people going ballistic. I mean, that's not going to be a pretty sight.
No, and I don't think that's going to happen. Well, let me explain this. The bankers, who are the real powers that be, will never allow undirected chaos to rule the streets.
Yeah.
Because you got to have a boogeyman. 100 years ago, the boogeyman was the communists. Then 80 years ago, it was the Nazis. Then 50 years ago, it was the Asian communists and the Russians. And that list lasted for about 35 years. And then about 15 years ago, it was radical Islam, which is now totally asymmetric, because you could have your government operatives, which is what I believe, for the record, happened in Paris. I wasn't going to say that until yesterday, but now, based on the facts that I'm seeing now, I'm definitely saying it was definitely a Parisian government / Mossad job. And one of the reasons why I say that is because the police chief in charge of the investigation conveniently suicided himself. That kind of tipped the balance of doubt in my mind. And then all these links between the alleged shooters, who were dressed head to toe in black and had balaclavas on, so we can't confirm their identities. We have to rely 100% on the government operatives to tell us who they are. We have no pictures, no video, no nothing to prove that it was them. And even if it was them, the alleged patsies have all kinds of connections to the Prime Minister and to radical Islamic fundamentalists, some of whom are Jewish, dressed up as Arabs to conflate anger against the world Muslim community. Now, this thing is has so many twists and turns in it that radical Islam, I was just on an interview yesterday, actually 2 days ago, for 3 hours, and I said, whatever happens, the bankers cannot be blamed. And I said, we've got a target-rich environment. Pick your poison. What's it going to be? Ebola? Radical Islamic fundamentalists? Cyber hackers? Hey, what about radical fundamentalist Islam cyber hackers?
Who have Ebola.
Who have Ebola, right? And I said that as a joke.
You heard it here first.
Right. I said it as a joke, and what do I read on Zero Hedge, which is my #1 news source for all things financial? U.S. CENTCOM hacked by ISIS. The very next day.
Nice.
I couldn't write this. Now, if you for one moment believe that ISIS can hack CENTCOM, then I've got something to sell you. But I'm just not buying that line.
Yeah, well, I mean, this could take the show in a whole totally different direction, but, you know, because I did some searching into the ISIS thing myself a little while ago, and I forget what it was that I Googled. It was like security management, government security management, or something like that, plus ISIS. And it is an official U.S. government website with the acronym ISIS. It's a U.S. government website with the acronym ISIS. And then I saw a picture. It was one of those many pictures of all these yahoos with brand new Toyotas, you know, and these long convoy. I'm like, they're saying they don't have a plan, right? That was the longest thing we kept hearing. We don't have no plan. I'm like, no plan? These guys are posing for photo ops in long convoys of brand new Toyotas. I'm like, one A10 in a strafing run with napalm will take out the whole thing. We're done. I mean, you call me up if you need a plan. I can help you out with that. You know, anytime you see these guys lining up for a photo op, napalm will take care of it. You know.
Well, actually, I referenced yesterday or 2 days ago in my interview, another interview. I said, go to YouTube, type in John McCain admits he created ISIS.
Oh no.
On Fox News with Greta Van Susteren. So it must be true, right? So anyways, he's on video saying that we created ISIS. And then Hillary Clinton in senatorial or congressional testimony said that the United States funded the Mujahideen against the Soviets in Afghanistan in 1979-1980. Well, no kidding, we know that. So we've got a major Democrat saying, for the record, that the Mujahideen were created by the United States. We've got a major Republican stating for the record that the United States created ISIS, and I'm going, why don't people believe this?
Right.
I mean, do you think that ISIS, which popped out of nowhere a few months after Al-Qaeda magically disappeared, they think there's no connection between the two of them? And here's what it all boils down to. Money. That's it. Because there is a major several $100 billion pipeline which is being proposed to feed natural gas to Europe. And there are two routes for the several $100 billion pipeline. One is through Iran, Iraq, Syria. The other is through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Turkey. Now, Iran, Iraq, Syria are not US dollar / NATO friendly. They are pro-Russian / Chinese. But Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey is. And I find it rather startling that the Turkish Prime Minister, whose name I can't recall right now, 2 days ago was in Paris basically saying, you know, je suis Charlie, as in I am with Charlie, or I am Charlie Hebdo, which was the name of the journalist organization that the massacre took place in. And he got back to Turkey today, and he got on national television and said flat out that this massacre was a French intelligence / Mossad operation. Now, I'm going to follow up on that, because for a Turkish prime minister, who, by the way, is a NATO member, to say that is huge. It's huge. So basically, because, and I need to back up a little bit here to go forward, the British Empire faded out between World War I and World War II because it couldn't stand the 1-2 punch of World War II. The powers that be in 1945 said America was basically untouched by World War II. So through the Bretton Woods Agreement, the United States dollar became the world's reserve currency. And the exchange rate between the American dollar and gold was held steady at $35 an ounce. Richard Nixon came on TV and on August 15, 1971, and interrupted Gunsmoke, which was the most popular TV show at the time, and said, I have temporarily authorized Secretary Connolly to suspend the convertibility of US dollars into gold. Thank you very much. And so what that meant was, from that point onwards, the US dollar was backed by nothing. Right. So evil genius Henry Kissinger came along and said, this is not going to fly for too much longer, so we need the US dollar to be backed by something, or the US dollar to control the price of something. So evil genius Henry Kissinger met with Saudi King Faisal in 1972 and made him an offer he couldn't refuse, which is, we will give you military support, and we will give you X amount of dollars per year if you agree with all your other Arab allies, which later became OPEC, to sell oil throughout the world exclusively in US dollars. Now, for 40 plus years, this has been huge. What this means is, if a businessman in Australia wants a massive supply of oil, he's got to take Australian dollars, convert them into US dollars, then buy his oil, and then get it shipped to Australia. That creates a supply, or sorry, a demand for US dollars. And anyone who's studied Economics 101 knows that the price of anything is determined by demand over supply. So even if you have a high supply of US dollars, and you certainly do, but if you can artificially rig the demand for US dollars, by getting these key OPEC nations to sell their oil exclusively in US dollars, then you've secured the value of the US dollar. And you've transitioned what the US dollar is essentially backed by from gold to oil. And that arrangement, the petrodollar arrangement, has been in force ever since 1973, except when Saddam Hussein came along and in 2000 said, you know what, I like this new currency called the euro. I think it's going to retain more of its value over the US dollar, so I'm going to start selling my oil in euros. Big mistake. Because the very next year, the very next year, 9/11 happened, and conveniently, Saddam Hussein had connections to Al-Qaeda, which never existed because we never found any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And those that we did were 20 years old, partially given to him via the U.S. military. That came out. Okay? So, Saddam Hussein became a terrorist, and he was villain number one next to Osama bin Laden, and he was bumped off. And another person came along called Muammar al-Gaddafi, and he said, you know what, I have an idea. It's called the North African dinar. It's going to be backed by gold. Big mistake. If you challenge the petrodollar, you'll be labeled a terrorist. So Muammar Gaddafi has been Muammar Gaddafi for 40 years, but suddenly he was labeled, you know, public enemy number one. So while he was still alive, the so-called rebels within Libya, who I can show 3 or 4 articles from mainstream media, were funded, armed, and trained by the CIA. We're just simply repackaged El Ciada, okay? Their number one priority, their first priority, wasn't taking control over the nation's finances for themselves. No, 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 no. It was to establish a Western-connected central bank.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. So who do you think pays those pipers? Right, and to add insult to injury, the Libyan gold, dozens of tons of Libyan gold, which were destined to become one of the sources for the North African gold-backed dinar, conveniently found their way to Switzerland. I mean, and I don't think the average Westerner knows this. I mean, I'm not a fan of Gaddafi. He's a dictator. And if you look back on some of his speeches, you'll clearly see how the guy is high on opium. I mean, literally, he's making grand speeches, and he's totally wasted. But life in Libya was number one in terms of all African nations. The Libyan government would give you money to start a business. The Libyan government would pay you money to have a family. The Libyan government subsidized gas to about 25 cents a gallon. The Libyan government gave you free university tuition. And compare that to the standard of living in America, and I'm going, you know what? In many ways, life in Libya under Gaddafi was better than life in America today, but of course now it's an absolute hellhole. It's descended into Hades, and it's just kill or be killed. And of course, the oil refineries there are NATO controlled now, and it's you know, life is bliss because we've now liberated Libya.
Well, so I mean, we've been watching it over a period of time. That it seems like any place that doesn't have a central bank, well, that's the next target. And the first thing they do after they topple that government is set up a central bank. I mean, when you look at J.P. Morgan Chase Bank leads a 13-bank consortium to establish the central bank of Iraq right after we, you know, go in there under that whole pretense of finding weapons of mass destruction. And we're seeing this over and over and over again. It's the central bank is like they're trying to get the central bank thing in strategic places, and anybody that gets in their way, they're going to get knocked off.
Totally. That's it. And like I said, with the Syrian situation, what do you think the assassination of Ambassador Chris Stevens in Benghazi, Libya was all about? Chris Stevens would have spilled the beans about Al-Qaeda, which was becoming to be rebranded as ISIS, was shipping arms into Syria through Turkey. He was going to sing like a bird about that. And no less than 3 Navy SEAL teams were ordered to stand down. Ambassador Stevens could have been rescued 3 times over, but that wasn't the point. The point was to kill him off. Okay? And again, we've got on video, or even John McCain's Twitter feed from the source, okay? Not a blogger source, from the source. You see pictures of John McCain tweeted out by John McCain's staff of John McCain, visiting the rebels in Syria.
All right, we'll come back and talk about that right after the break. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and we're talking with Leonard Ulrich. We got the last half hour left to go, and during the break, I was looking up something, and I'm going to put this on the screen for you here. All I did was I Googled Global Security Management. That was what I Googled. And this is the website that pops up when you do Global Security Management. Integrated Systems Improvement Services, Inc. ISIS. Intelligence Technology Training, Security and Intelligence Training and Assessments, Intelligence, Communications, and Technical Resources. Right, look at all the little pictures that are coming across the screen there. U.S. Government Corporate Executive Protection Services, Communications, Technical Services, Equipment, and in conflict zones, in quotes, interesting, Government and Corporate Security in quote-unquote conflict zones. And that's what really caught my attention, too, is because I had seen a picture of one of those, ISIS pictures of the convoys and all the yahoos, all with their faces all wrapped up and whatnot, holding AK-47s and various other pieces of equipment. And then there was one shot, and I wish I had captured it. I don't know where I saw it, but it showed a guy, and he was pretty far in the distance. But he was like standing next to one of the vehicles, and he had his sleeve rolled up. And if you zoom in, kind of like this dude here on the end right here, this guy right here that had the beaner thing on his collar, it was a dude kind of like that. And you zoom in on it, and he's got a U.S. I think it was a Ranger Special Forces tattoo on his forearm. Now, the context of the entire picture are these supposed Islam, Muslim radicals, whatever, going through town and causing all kinds of chaos, and yet one of the dudes in the picture has got a U.S. Army Ranger tattoo on him. And then you go to a website like this, and you're like, ISIS has demonstrated expertise and success in performing mission-critical tasks at home and abroad. Our personnel have been trained and tested, often decorated, in the fields of combat, security, intelligence, and more. And you were just before the break gonna quote something, or I don't know if you got it that far or not, where I think you're talking about John McCain tweeting or something like that. Where did we leave off right before the break? You were about to make a point on something like that.
Yeah, basically I said that John McCain's own Twitter feed shows photos of John McCain meeting with these so-called rebels in Syria, one of whom happened to be Abu Anwar al-Baghdadi, who was conveniently killed off about a year and a half after the creation of ISIS. So if one of you or anyone who's listening to this broadcast gets any ideas where you can make a lot of money helping the U.S. government with covert actions, just keep in mind that they bring you up and they will tear you down. So it is a dangerous game to be working for the dark side.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've got just shy of a half hour left, and I want to talk about something that I wrote about and that I know that you're passionate about, and that's the iconography on the back of the $1 bill and our currency in general. And I want to run something by you, and I don't know if you've heard anything about this before. Or, first of all, have you ever heard the broadcast that I did with Tim Bentz called Canaanite Altars in the Federal Reserve?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm getting in contact with Tim Bentz. I've got his phone number. And long story short, for all the listeners here, again, we're compressing a 3-hour broadcast, which you did with Tim, in about 30 seconds. So long story short, Tim had reason to believe that he needed to take a trip to Jekyll Island and basically do some hardcore spiritual warfare over what the local curator of the Federal Reserve Museum, or the museum on Jekyll Island, showed him or proved to him archaeologically and historically that there was an altar where human sacrifice took place, where the Federal Reserve was hatched on Jekyll Island, Georgia.
Yeah, the living room. As he was telling the story, he was like, "Well, who would be crazy enough to build a house?" Because he was like, "Can I see it?" And the guy's like, "No, it's still in existence, but you can't see it." He's like, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, there's a house built on top of it." He goes, "Who would be crazy enough to build a house on top of a Canaanite blood altar?" And he said, "Rockefeller." And so the story goes, the room where as G. Edward Griffin would say, the creature from Jekyll Island was hatched, is literally right on top of this Canaanite altar. Now, that's one side, and that's a 4-hour show. People can just do a Google search on Canaanite altars in the Federal Reserve, listen to the whole story if you want. But I recently purchased there's a website called mysocialbook.com, and they do a really nice job, actually. They'll take your Facebook, and everything in your Facebook, they will turn it into a book for you. And you can set the parameters for all the comments and stuff, how many comments you want. Of course, I can have 700 to 1,000 comments on some of my posts, so I limited it so I didn't have to pay too much because you're limited to 500 pages in the book. But when I was just kind of going through, this is my year in review, January 1st through December 31st, 2014. So this is my Facebook page in a year, how big it is. But I was just flipping through it right before we got ready to do this interview, and I came across a picture that I posted. What date was this? This was June 1st, 2014, about the Titanic. And the picture on this, and I've never heard of this before, so if you know anything about it, I'm interested to hear what your take is. But it says, did you know the sinking of the Titanic led to the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve? The novel Futility in 1898, creation of Morgan Robertson, detailed the sinking of an unsinkable ship, the largest vessel afloat. This imaginary ship, named Titan, collided with an iceberg during April, resulting in a high loss of life because the ship carried too few lifeboats. Now, this is in a fiction book, supposedly written in the 1800s. 14 years later, with uncanny similarities, the real ship, the Titanic, recreated what happened in the novel. The two ships had almost identical names. Both ships were designed to be unsinkable. Both were touted as the largest ships at sea. Both collided with icebergs in April. Both resulted in many deaths due to a shortage of lifeboats. Plus, both had strikingly similar floor plans and technical descriptions. Benjamin Guggenheim, I think, Isidore Strauss, the head of Macy's department stores, and John Jacob Astor, probably the wealthiest man in the world, were all killed when it sank. Those three men were the main opposition to the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. By April 1912, all opposition to the Federal Reserve was eliminated. In December of 1913, the Federal Reserve came into being in the United States, controlled by Illuminati banksters. Now, again, like you said, you find it on the internet, you got to, okay, whatever. This was a picture that I found and posted it, but what, if anything, do you know about that story?
Well, it is a fact that John Jacob Astor was against the Federal Reserve, and of course he lost his life like so many other people did on the Titanic. And so any significant opposition to the creation of that creature from Jekyll Island, which took over the United States, was killed off, you know?
Coincidentally eliminated.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen where flights go off course and kill people who speak out against the powers that be. I'm talking about Senator Larry McDonald, if my memory serves correct, where his plane mysteriously goes off of Japanese airspace and into Russian airspace during the mid-'80s, I'll say, during the Cold War. And, you know, he spoke out against what we're speaking out against. And the question is, you know, how can a modern airplane with transponders and flight telemetry go off course into enemy airspace without help? And so, like I said, if you believe in the conspiratorial, I even hate that word, the intentional view of history as opposed to the accidental view of history, then you will soon realize that, hey, killing a couple hundred people or a couple thousand people to achieve your goal is just collateral damage.
Yeah. Okay, so we look on the back of our U.S. $1 bill, which I really refuse to carry. If somebody gives me one, I try to get rid of that thing as quickly as I can. I am absolutely convinced that it is a talisman fused with occult energy, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. And it's interesting because they've had all of our other currencies gotten kind of a facelift. You know, all the other notes, they've got new versions of them, but the $1 still looks the same. Oh, there you go. Yep.
Yeah, right here.
Which was reversed too. The imagery originally was the other way around, and I believe it was FDR said, no, switch it, so that we have it the way we have it now. So I know what I think about it, but I want to know what you think about it. What's on your mind regarding the $1 bill?
Well, this piece of paper here, which is the most popular symbol of currency in America, is brought to us by a 32nd degree Freemason, a 33rd degree Freemasonic president, a Russian theosophist, and a Russian theosophist / Luciferian. So how about that?
How about that?
And yeah, so basically what you've got here is a reference in Latin, Annuit Coeptis Novus Ordo Seclorum, which if you go all the way back to the Roman poet Virgil in 72 AD, he first referenced a new order of the ages, or if you translate it, New World Order. And in case you think, well, that's just too conspiratorial, you're putting this out of context, you have to read Virgil's Eclogue, because the poem talks about a new breed of men created by the union of quote-unquote gods and enlightened men. And that is the ultimate goal of the quote-unquote New World Order. The New World Order is the Old World Order, which goes all the way back to Babylon and Nimrod, which is to create humanity 2.0 so that man becomes God. And, you know, you can go all the way back thousands of years to Babylon, even back to Sumeria, you can see that. And ask yourself one question. How many ancient pyramids exist in America? And the answer is 0. So this right here cannot be an American symbol. So if it's not an American symbol, it's got to be a symbol of something else. And the Freemasonic / Luciferian powers that be have encoded layer upon layer of meaning in this symbology. It would take me, honestly, 20 minutes at breakneck speed to decode all of this. And so that's why I can't do it here. But the point is, Henry Asgard Wallace was FDR's Secretary of Agriculture back in the day. And he was in frequent communication to his quote-unquote guru, who happened to be Nicholas Roerich, who in turn happened to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize no less than 3 times. So Nicholas Roerich, a Russian theosophist, had some clout internationally. And Nicholas Roerich was in turn inspired by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky of Russia, who in turn, being a theosophist, was inspired by a demonic entity known as Djwal-Khul. Don't believe me, read her own writings. So the Theosophical Society, which Henry Asgard Wallace was a member of for 10 years, had a main publication called Lucifer Magazine. And Lucifer Magazine was published by Lucis Trust, which has existed for over 100 years and now is a division of the United Nations. And the United Nations building was donated by the Rockefellers to the international community, which used to be the ground for a slaughterhouse called Fresh Kills New York. So you have sacrifice going on the ground where the United Nations building was founded, and you have sacrifice going on where the Federal Reserve Plan was hatched in Jekyll Island, Georgia. So right there, I just made ties between Freemasonry, the presidency, theosophy, Luciferianism, and sacrifice, all in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. So being that this currency has not been messed with, like the other ones, the other notes that we have, I mean, even the coins have been changed. So if they're leaving this intact, what is that saying to you? What does that mean?
Well, it must be very important because it's the only denomination of your U.S. currency which hasn't been changed in about 80 years. This is still the original design. And when people like George Herbert Walker Bush get up in front of international television and starts talking about, during his inauguration speeches, about the angel in the whirlwind and about the ancient hope or the new order of the ancients, he's referencing specific occult terminology in James H. Billington's Fire in the Minds of Men, which is a summarization of centuries of Luciferian revolutionary thought. And again, pick up a book called Fire in the Minds of Men by Billington. And James Billington used to be the boss of the, help me out here, Rob, I'm a little bit lost in my terminology, the main library in that, oh yes, the Library of Congress. He used to head that up. So he's no fool. So again, George Herbert Walker Bush was a member of 2 satanic organizations, meaning Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove. And in case you think that the symbology on the back of the US dollar bill isn't enough, you turn it over, and right over here on the top right-hand one,
yeah, the little
you see
owl.
If you grab a magnifying glass, this is how detailed it is, you'll see a little owl there. And that owl is identical to the owl of Bohemia in Bohemian Grove, which is a 2,800 or 1,800 acre ancient redwood forest where a reproduction of Molech in an owl form made out of concrete and steel reinforcement has been erected for about 70 years ago, and world leaders gather around in the height of the entertainment, if you can call it that, during the 2 weeks in the middle of June, is to burn a plywood effigy of a child called Care, which symbolizes the worldly cares of the group, to pre-recorded screams and pre-recorded howls of laughter on the part of the Owl of Bohemia, which really, if you study it, is really Molech, which goes back thousands of years to the Israelites versus the Canaanites where the Canaanites and surrounding tribes would sacrifice their children alive in this brass bull in order to achieve fertility rights and crop harvests for the next year. So again, Luciferianism, child sacrifice, unjust weights and measures, debt, death, and deception. And that's the paradigm we live in. And unfortunately, many Christians tell me that they want the truth. But again, I've reached over 5 million people, and I can't reach my own church.
How pathetic is that, man? I mean, we've talked about this off air before, but you know, maybe it needs to be said here. I mean, the church is supposed to be the place where people go to get truth, and yet so little of it is coming out of the church these days. And those of us who are out there trying to talk about these things, we're getting blacklisted and kicked to the curb, kicked out of churches, kicked out of conferences. And so the only choice we have is to try to do shows like this to try to get it out to the masses. I mean, it's like if they're not getting the truth in church, where are they going to get it?
Right. For example, just look at the story of Jonah in the whale. I don't think too many people realize that perfume is highly refined whale vomit. It is. Again, do your research. Okay?
Yeah.
It's highly refined, yes, kind of like crude oil is refined. So you put gasoline in your car, right?
Well, I got one even better for you. When you see natural flavors and the ingredients.
Oh, my word. Don't even go there. Don't even go there.
I'm going to do it. It's beaver anal gland.
Yes, yes.
First of all, who comes up with this? Who says, hey, I'm going to start squeezing juice out of a beaver anal gland and maybe make that a food additive?
Totally, right. So when Jonah is in the belly of this whale and Jonah dies, Jonah doesn't survive and camp out 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of this whale. He literally dies and comes back from the other side and writes a little glimpse here and there of what he saw, okay, which is fascinating. I won't get into it. But the point is, if you're a Christian and you believe that story, if you honestly believe that a guy can die and be revived after being preserved physically in the gut of a whale, then why can't you believe that it's just a little bit hard for 2 planes hitting 2 buildings in New York to bring down 3 buildings
at free fall speed,
at free fall speed,
and leave behind the paper passport?
Yes. No, see, this paper passport was made out of Thor's hammer because it survives the fireball. It survives going through the steel-reinforced concrete pillars as they're being disintegrated at several hundred miles per hour, but it lands on the ground amongst thousands of tons of dust and twisted, mangled steel within 24 hours in legible condition.
Right.
I mean, it's just like finding a paper needle in a 50-acre haystack.
That's on fire.
That's on fire. That's on fire. Right, right. So I've had people that I try to reach out to tell me that they can't believe my explanation because of my weakest argument. My explanation for 9/11 being an inside job, because of it, my weakest argument, which is the explanation for the odd phone calls between the allegedly hijacked planes and loved ones on the ground. And my explanation is very simple. Look, the phone calls were odd. Like, hi, Mom, this is Jack Bingham.
You do
believe me, don't you?
Right.
Right? Right? So while you can fake somebody's voice in real time, you can't necessarily fake the intimate details that two people would have with each other. And if cell phones on airplanes worked so well in 2001, then why did all the airlines spend millions of dollars upgrading their cell phone antennas in the tails of these planes after 2001? I mean, in terms of physics, it just doesn't work. And where did the plane go in Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Well, I tell you where it went in my documentary. Because you can't have a full-size plane hitting the bullseye of a pre-existing scar, which I document geographically, according to the United States Geographical Service aerial survey. That scar in Shanksville, Pennsylvania was there before 9/11. So essentially what you're asking me to believe is that this full-size jet airliner hits a bullseye without leaving anything significant in its place. I'm sorry, I don't believe that. Okay? Now, again, we see false flag after false flag since 9/11. It's so obvious to those who want to see, and honestly, it takes more faith not to believe in these things not being an inside job than it does to say, you know what, I don't know all the facts here, but I see these dots in front of me, like the connections to the French government in the Charlie Hebdo massacre, the connections to Mossad agents posing as radical Islamic fundamentalists, the police chief in charge of the investigation suiciding himself. These are pretty serious dots, and it takes more for me to believe the official story than it does for me to believe that governments in the West had some kind of hand on what happened this past week.
Agreed. So, speaking of connecting dots, we've got about a minute left. How can people see the dots that you've connected in your next video, Volume 2? Okay,
go to the Leonard Ulrich YouTube channel. Just spell my name out, Leonard Ulrich, and very soon I will start posting videos like this, and as well as many other interviews and short clips from the movie, rough cuts, little teasers. And my website is being built as we speak, and I plan on doing essentially a Rob Skiba, which is going diskless and internet-based.
Diskless and internet-based. Well, we'll look forward to it for sure. Hey, Leonard, it was awesome having you on the show again. Man, we're going to have to do this again because I have a feeling we just scratched the surface.
Exactly. I really enjoyed this.
All right, buddy. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching here on Google Hangouts, the Revolutionary Radio Project. Good night, everybody.